The waitress approached the millionaire and said, "Don't close this deal. They want to steal from you." However, the millionaire discovered something about her that left him speechless. The night was alive with energy at the Skyline, one of New York's most exclusive restaurants. The soft hum of conversation, the clinking of crystal glasses, and the elegant glow of chandeliers set the scene for high-stakes business deals. Ashley Morgan moved swiftly between tables, her tray balanced with the grace of someone who had done this 1,000 times. She wasn't just a waitress. She was an observer, at a private booth near the panoramic window overlooking the city. Scott Anderson, a man whose name carried weight in the corporate world, sat across from two well-dressed investors. His navy blue suit was perfectly tailored, his confidence evident in the way he leaned back in his chair. This was a man who was never played, but tonight, he was being set up. Ashley wasn't eavesdropping, at least not intentionally, but as she placed a bottle of wine on the table beside them, her ears picked up something that made her heart skip a beat. The two investors, assuming no one around them spoke their native language, chuckled softly as one of them muttered, "The fool has no idea. Once he signs, his empire is ours." Ashley froze, her fingers tightening around the tray. Did I just hear that right? She had spent years studying languages, one of the few things she still had from her past life, and right now, her fluency had just exposed a multi-million-dollar betrayal. Her first instinct was to walk away. Not my problem, not my business, but something inside her rebelled. She had lost everything once because she hadn't acted fast enough. If she stood by and did nothing now, she would be no better than the people who had betrayed her. Taking a deep breath, she turned toward Scott and subtly leaned down as she cleared his empty glass. "Don't sign that deal." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Scott's sharp green eyes flickered with confusion as he looked up at her. "Excuse me." Ashley straightened, gripping the tray tighter. "They're scamming you. They just said they're going to take everything once you sign. I speak their language." I heard them. For a moment, Scott simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, a slow smirk formed on his lips. "And why should I believe a waitress?" Ashley's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Because I know what I'm talking about. And because if I were lying, what would I possibly gain from this?" Scott studied her for a long second, then turned his attention back to the two investors, who were still obliviously sipping their wine. A flicker of doubt passed over his face. "Would you excuse me for a moment?" Scott said, rising abruptly, without waiting for an answer. He walked toward the back of the restaurant, his phone already in hand. Ashley exhaled slowly, stepping away before the investors could notice her. She had done what she could. Now it was up to him. Minutes later, Scott returned, his expression tight. He slid back into his seat, looking between the two men with a new intensity. "Gentlemen," he said, voice cool, "I've decided to reconsider the deal. In fact, I think I'll be canceling our negotiations altogether." The two investors stiffened. One of them forced a laugh. "Mr. Anderson, you can't be serious. I am," Scott interrupted, his voice dangerously smooth. "And do you know what's funny? I was just reminded that sometimes it pays to listen." He threw his napkin onto the table and stood up, leaving them speechless as he strode toward the exit. Ashley, who had been watching from a distance, barely had time to process what had happened before she felt a presence beside her. "Come with me." She turned to find Scott standing there, his piercing gaze locked onto hers. "Excuse me," she asked. I want to know how a waitress at the Skyline knew enough to stop me from making $1 million mistake," he said, crossing his arms. "So either you come with me and explain, or I start asking questions right here in front of everyone." Ashley hesitated. This was exactly the kind of attention she had been avoiding. But at the same time, if Scott Anderson was willing to listen, maybe, just maybe, he could be the ally she needed. Nodding once, she untied her apron, handed it to a coworker, and followed him out. Outside, the crisp night air hit her skin as Scott led her toward a sleek black car parked at the curb. He leaned against the hood, eyes scanning her from head to toe. "Talk." Ashley folded her arms. "Before I do, I want to know something. Did you actually check if I was right?" Scott let out a low chuckle. "Oh, I checked, and you weren't just right. You saved my ass." Ashley exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "Then let me tell you a story, Mr. Anderson." She met his gaze head-on. "Because this isn't the first time I've watched someone get robbed of everything they had." Scott's smirk faded. "Go on." And with that, Ashley Morgan began to tell him who she really was. Ashley took a slow breath, steadying herself. It had been years since she had spoken about this, and now she was about to spill it all to a man who, just minutes ago, had doubted her every word. But Scott Anderson wasn't just any man. He had been her father's friend once, and if there was even a sliver of that loyalty left in him, he needed to know the truth. "My name is Ashley Morgan," she began, watching his expression carefully. "And if that name sounds familiar, it's because my father was Alexander Morgan." Scott's face shifted, a flicker of recognition. Then, his brows furrowed. "Alexander Morgan, the same Alexander Morgan who owned Morgan Enterprises." Ashley nodded. "The same one." Scott ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "I knew your father. We weren't just business acquaintances. We were friends. We started in the industry around the same time. But after a while, we lost touch. I heard about his accident, but..." His voice trailed off as if trying to connect the pieces. "That accident was the beginning of everything." Ashley's jaw tightened. "I was supposed to inherit my father's estate, his company, his assets, everything. But after he died, my stepmother, Nancy, manipulated the system, fabricated documents, and somehow managed to strip me of my inheritance. I lost everything overnight." Scott's eyes darkened. "Nancy Morgan, I remember her." His voice carried a note of disdain. "Your father married her late in life. She always struck me as ambitious." "That's putting it lightly," Ashley scoffed. "She wasn't just ambitious. She was ruthless. My father trusted her, and she played the grieving widow card perfectly. No one questioned her when she took control. And I was too young, too lost in my own grief, to fight back in time." Scott crossed his arms, studying her intently. "And that's why you're working at the Skyline, because she took everything." Ashley nodded. "I didn't have access to my father's accounts. She cut me off from everything. I had to start from scratch, but I didn't just roll over and accept it. I studied. I learned everything I could about finance, business, and law, waiting for the moment I could prove what she did." Scott was silent for a long moment. Then, he let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "And here I was, thinking I was doing you a favor by listening." His smirk faded into something more serious. "But if what you're saying is true, then Nancy didn't just rob you. She committed fraud. Maybe worse." Ashley swallowed hard. "I know she did, but proving it is another story. She's covered her tracks too well." Scott's expression hardened. "I know powerful people, Ashley. People who can dig into places the law doesn't always reach. If you want the truth, I can help you find it." Ashley's heart pounded. She had been fighting this battle alone for so long that the idea of having an ally, especially someone as influential as Scott, felt almost surreal. "But why would you help me?" she asked, not hiding her skepticism. Scott's eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite place. "Because your father was a good man, and because I hate being played for a fool." He smirked, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Nancy just tried to screw over the wrong person. If she's as dangerous as you say, I want to know exactly what she's capable of." Ashley exhaled, weighing his words. She didn't fully trust Scott. How could she? But he had the resources she lacked. And right now, she needed all the help she could get. "All right," she said finally. "But we have to be careful. Nancy's not stupid. If she finds out we're coming after her, she'll make sure we never get close." Scott's smirk returned, sharper this time. Let her try. The next morning, Ashley found herself sitting across from Scott in his high-rise office, staring at the skyline of New York City. "This is surreal," she muttered. "Yesterday, I was serving wine. Now I'm planning an investigation into my father's murder." Scott chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "You're adjusting faster than most people would." She let out a breath. "I've been waiting for this moment for years. I just never expected it to happen like this." Scott's assistant knocked on the door, stepping in with a folder in hand. "Sir, I pulled some preliminary records on Nancy Morgan, as you requested." Scott took the folder and flipped it open, his expression shifting from curiosity to something darker. Well, this just got interesting." Ashley leaned forward. "What is it?" Scott turned the folder toward her. According to these records, Nancy's net worth skyrocketed after your father's death. She sold off assets that were supposed to be locked under the estate, and she's been making some very large wire transfers to offshore accounts. Ashley's stomach twisted. She's been hiding money. Scott nodded. And that's just the beginning. He pulled out another document. This report shows that shortly before your father's accident, he made a call to a lawyer, someone outside his usual circle, a lawyer who specialized in rewriting wills. Ashley's breath hitched. Are you saying... Scott met her gaze. I'm saying your father might have changed his will before he died, and if that's true, Nancy has been sitting on a lie this entire time. Ashley clenched her fists. Then we need to find that lawyer. Scott's smirk returned. Already on it. I have people tracking him down as we speak. Ashley stared at him, her emotions warring between hope and apprehension. She had spent years dreaming of justice, but now that she was on the verge of uncovering something real, the weight of it all hit her. Scott must have sensed it, because his voice softened. This isn't just about revenge, Ashley. If your father really did change his will, that means he never wanted Nancy to have anything. This is about setting things right. Ashley nodded, gripping the edge of the table. Then let's set things right. Scott grinned. Now that's the spirit. Outside, the city continued its daily routine, unaware that a storm was coming, and at its center was a woman who had nothing left to lose, and a man who had just found the perfect reason to fight. Ashley sat in Scott's office, her fingers drumming against the polished wood of his desk as she stared at the documents spread before her. It had been years since she had seen her father's name on anything official, and now, staring at the financial records, the bank transactions, and the legal files that Scott's team had pulled together overnight, reality settled in. This was happening. She was finally making progress after years of feeling like a ghost in her own life. Scott leaned back in his chair, his sharp gaze focused on her. I've already sent someone to track down the lawyer your father contacted. If we can confirm that he changed his will before he died, that's our first real proof that Nancy committed fraud. Ashley exhaled, processing everything. If he really did rewrite his will, then that means Nancy knew. And if she knew, she must have done something to make sure it never saw the light of day. Scott nodded. Exactly. And that's where things get messy. Ashley looked up at him. Messier than this, Scott smirked. But there was no amusement in his eyes. If Nancy had the power to bury a legal document, she's not going to sit back and let us dig it up. Ashley's stomach twisted. She had spent years fighting to survive, working in the shadows, trying to find a way to prove what had been stolen from her. But now, she wasn't just playing defense. She was about to go on the offensive for the first time, and that meant war. Scott tapped his fingers against the desk. I have people monitoring Nancy's accounts. If she starts moving money or covering her tracks, we'll know about it. Ashley tilted her head. Do you really have that much power? Scott smirked. More than she realizes. And I don't like losing. Ashley studied him for a moment. She knew men like Scott, powerful, confident, and used to getting their way. But there was something different about him. He wasn't just helping her out of curiosity or even out of loyalty to her father. This was personal for him now. He had been targeted by Nancy too, and he didn't take betrayal lightly. A knock at the door interrupted them. Scott's assistant stepped in, holding out a phone. Sir, it's the private investigator. He has something. Scott took the phone and put it on speaker. Talk to me. The investigator's voice was calm, but urgent. I found the lawyer, name's David Klein, retired about a year ago. He lives upstate, off the grid, but I managed to track him down. Ashley leaned forward, her pulse spiking. And, does he remember my father? There was a pause. Oh, he remembers. He says your father came to him about a month before his accident. He was adamant about rewriting his will. Ashley's breath hitched. Do we have proof? He claims he has a copy of the original will. The problem is, he's hesitant to talk over the phone. I get the feeling he's scared of something, or someone. Scott exchanged a glance with Ashley. Where is he now? His home. Upstate. He agreed to meet, but he wants it done in person. No emails, no calls. Nothing traceable. Scott's jaw tightened. That's not a good sign. Ashley clenched her fists. Then we go to him. Scott didn't hesitate. We'll be there in a few hours. Keep him safe until then. He ended the call and stood up. grabbing his jacket. "Let's move." Ashley followed him out of the office, her mind racing. If this lawyer really had a copy of her father's will, then Nancy's entire house of lies was about to collapse. The drive upstate was tense. Scott kept his eyes on the road while Ashley stared out the window, her thoughts spiraling. She had imagined this moment so many times, finding a lead, finally getting close to proving the truth. But now that it was happening, there was a gnawing fear in her chest. Scott seemed to notice. "You okay?" Ashley forced a breath. What if he's lying? What if this is a setup?" Scott's grip on the wheel tightened. "Then we deal with it. But something tells me he's telling the truth. If he was in on it, he wouldn't be hiding." Ashley nodded, hoping he was right. They arrived at a secluded cabin deep in the woods. The place was quiet. Too quiet. Scott parked the car and they stepped out cautiously. Ashley scanned the surroundings, her nerves on edge. Something doesn't feel right. Scott gestured for her to stay close as they approached the door. He knocked, and after a long pause, footsteps echoed from inside. The door creaked open, revealing a man in his 60s, his face lined with worry. He peered at them before glancing over their shoulders, as if checking for unwanted company. "You Ashley?" he asked. She nodded. "David Klein," he exhaled. "Come in, but make it quick. If they find out I talked to you, I'm as good as dead." Ashley exchanged a glance with Scott before stepping inside. The cabin was cluttered but filled with stacks of papers. Old legal documents and books. Klein motioned for them to sit as he moved to a desk, rifling through a locked drawer. "Your father was a good man," he said, pulling out a worn folder. "He came to me in a hurry. He wanted to rewrite everything, leave his estate directly to you. He was afraid someone would take it from you." Ashley swallowed hard. "Did he say why?" Klein hesitated, then nodded. "He told me he didn't trust Nancy anymore. Said she had changed. He was planning to file for divorce." Ashley's stomach dropped. Divorce? That would have changed everything. Scott spoke before she could. "And you have a copy of that will." Klein placed the folder on the table. "Right here. I kept it, just in case. But I never got to file it. Your father died before he could sign the final document." Ashley's heart pounded. "But if this was never filed, it's not legally binding." Klein nodded. "That's right. But it proves intent. And if you can find out what happened to the final copy, you might have enough to bring Nancy down." Ashley reached for the folder, flipping it open. There it was, her father's signature on the draft, dated just weeks before his death. Scott exhaled. "This changes everything." Before anyone could say another word, the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside made them all freeze. Klein's face paled. "You need to go now." Scott pulled Ashley to her feet. "Come on." But before they could reach the door, the unmistakable sound of a gunshot shattered the silence. Ashley's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just about money anymore, Nancy knew, and she was willing to kill to keep the truth buried. The gunshot echoed through the cabin, sharp and final. Ashley's pulse spiked as she instinctively ducked, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Scott reacted instantly, pulling her down behind the desk as David Klein scrambled back, his face ashen. "Stay down," Scott ordered, voice low but firm. His hand was already reaching inside his jacket. Ashley wasn't sure if he was carrying a gun, but at that moment, she hoped he was. Klein's hands were shaking as he pressed his back against the wall. "I told you, Nancy has eyes everywhere. You should have never come here." Ashley barely registered his words, her ears straining for movement outside. The crunch of footsteps on gravel sent another wave of adrenaline through her. Someone was coming. Scott peeked out the window, his jaw tightening. Black SUV, tinted windows. This isn't a coincidence. Ashley's stomach churned. "They're here for him," she whispered. Scott nodded grimly. "And if we don't move, they'll come for us next." David Klein looked between them, breathing hard. "I shouldn't have talked. They'll kill me for this." Ashley grabbed his wrist, forcing him to look at her. "Then help us. Help me. We need to get out of here. But we also need to keep that will safe." Klein hesitated for only a second before nodding. He shoved the folder into Ashley's hands. "Take it. I have a flash drive with backup copies, but the original draft is in there. You have to go now." Scott glanced at the door. "There's a back exit, right?" Klein pointed toward a narrow hallway. Through the kitchen, a shadow passed by the window, and Scott cursed under his breath. "Move! Now!" Ashley clutched the folder tightly as she followed Klein and Scott through the small cabin, her legs stiff with fear. The kitchen door led to a narrow path through the trees, barely illuminated by the fading sunlight. The sound of another car door slamming shut sent a fresh wave of panic through her. Scott didn't hesitate. He grabbed Ashley's hand and pulled her forward, his pace quick but controlled. Klein trailed behind them, his breathing heavy. They had barely made it 10 feet into the trees when a deep voice shouted from behind. "We know you're in there, Klein. Step out, and this doesn't have to get ugly." Ashley felt her blood run cold. She recognized that voice. Vincent Carter, Nancy's right-hand man. Scott pulled her behind a thick tree trunk, his expression unreadable. He motioned for Klein to stay low, then leaned close to Ashley. "We have 2 options. We run for the car, or we fight." Ashley swallowed hard. "If we run, they'll shoot us in the back." Scott's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then we fight." Before Ashley could respond, a second voice cut through the silence. "This is your last chance, Klein. Hand over whatever they gave you, and we'll pretend this never happened." Klein let out a shuddering breath. "I told you. They're here for me. If I give myself up, they might let you go." Ashley's grip on his arm tightened. "No, we're not leaving you behind." Scott let out a low exhale. "All right, change of plans. We don't fight. We outsmart them." Ashley watched as his mind worked through the options, his eyes scanning the forest around them. Then, his gaze landed on Klein's car, parked just a few feet away from the cabin. The only problem: the men in black suits were standing right beside it. Scott turned back to Klein. "Do you have your car keys?" Klein nodded, fumbling in his pocket before handing them over. Scott took them, then looked at Ashley. "Stay close. When I say run, you run." Ashley didn't get a chance to ask what he meant before he stood up and, in one swift motion, hurled the keys deep into the woods. The metallic jingle barely had time to register before Scott shouted, "Run!" Ashley bolted. The moment the keys hit the ground, the men near the car turned their heads, distracted for just a second. It was all they needed. Scott grabbed Ashley's hand and yanked her forward. Weaving through the trees at a breakneck pace, Klein struggled to keep up, his breath coming in gasps. But fear pushed him forward. Gunshots rang out behind them, sending birds scattering into the sky. Ashley ducked, nearly stumbling over an exposed root, but Scott caught her just in time, keeping her upright. They reached Scott's car, parked just down the road from the cabin. He yanked open the passenger door. "Get in." Ashley dove inside, clutching the folder against her chest as Klein tumbled into the back seat. Scott jumped behind the wheel, and with a sharp turn of the key, the engine roared to life. The black SUV screeched onto the road behind them. Ashley's fingers dug into the leather seat as Scott gunned the engine, the tires screeching against the pavement. "Hold on," he muttered. The SUV closed in, headlights flashing in the rearview mirror. Scott's grip tightened on the wheel. "They're not going to stop." Ashley's mind raced. "We need to lose them." Scott's lips curled into a smirk. "Oh, don't worry, I intend to." He took a sharp left, sending Ashley crashing against the door. The SUV followed, gaining on them. Klein groaned from the back seat. "They're going to kill us." Scott's smirk didn't waver. Not today. Up ahead, the road curved toward a narrow bridge. Scott pressed down on the gas, forcing the car forward at an alarming speed. The SUV kept close, their pursuers unwilling to let them escape. Ashley's breath caught in her throat. "Scott, trust me." As they reached the bridge, Scott yanked the emergency brake. Sending the car into a perfect spin, the vehicle skidded sideways, tires screaming against the pavement before coming to a dead stop at the very edge of the bridge. The SUV didn't have the same luck. Unable to brake in time, it swerved violently to avoid crashing into them, overcompensated, and plunged straight off the side of the bridge. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, the sound of metal crunching against rocks far below. Ashley stared in shock, her pulse hammering in her ears. Scott let out a breath and turned to her. "Well, that takes care of that." Klein's head fell back against the seat. "I think I'm going to pass out." Ashley let out a nervous laugh, adrenaline still surging through her. "I can't believe that worked." Scott grinned. "You should never underestimate me." Ashley turned her attention back to the folder in her lap. They had the will. They had proof. But Nancy wouldn't let this go. And if tonight had proven anything, it was that she was willing to do whatever it took to keep the truth buried. The adrenaline was still coursing through Ashley's veins as Scott drove away from the wreckage, his hands steady on the wheel. Despite what had just happened, Klein was slumped in the back seat, clutching his chest as he tried to catch his breath, while Ashley sat in stunned silence, gripping the folder as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. Scott glanced at her. "Are you okay?" Ashley exhaled, forcing herself to unclench her fingers. "I don't know. Are we even safe right now?" Scott's jaw tightened. "We just sent a message. They're not going to underestimate us again, but that also means Nancy's going to come back stronger." Ashley shivered at the thought. If she had any doubt before, tonight had proven that Nancy wouldn't hesitate to kill to keep her secrets buried. But they had what they needed. They had proof that her father wanted to cut Nancy out of his will. Now, they just had to find a way to use it. Klein groaned from the back seat. "I need a drink. And a new identity, and maybe a vacation." Scott smirked. "Get in line." Ashley turned to look at Klein. "You need to lay low. If Nancy knows you're alive, she won't stop." Klein let out a dry chuckle. "You don't have to tell me twice." He shifted uncomfortably. "I have a place, a cabin up north. No one knows about it. I can stay there until things calm down." Scott nodded. "Good. We'll drop you off with enough cash to get by." Klein looked at Ashley. "You've got everything now. That will is your best shot at proving Nancy forged the documents." Ashley nodded, but doubt gnawed at her. "It's not enough legally. It's just a draft. We need more." Scott sighed, his fingers tightening on the steering wheel. "Then we find more." The car fell into silence as they drove through the darkened roads of upstate New York, the tension still thick between them. When they finally reached Klein's safe house, Scott handed him an envelope filled with cash. "Stay out of sight," he warned. "If anything seems off, call me." Klein nodded, looking at Ashley. "You're braver than you realize, kid. Don't let her win." Ashley watched as he disappeared into the small cabin, then turned back to Scott. "We need to find someone who was close to my father in his final days," she said. "Someone who can confirm that he wanted Nancy out of his life." Scott drummed his fingers on the dashboard. "I might have an idea." He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. After a few rings, a gruff voice answered. "Who the hell is calling me at this hour?" Scott smirked. "Hello to you too." "Henry." Ashley listened as Scott gave a quick rundown of the situation. Henry, apparently an old friend of Scott's, had been in the legal field for years. "You said Alexander Morgan?" Henry asked. "I remember him. That man had an ironclad reputation. If he wanted Nancy out of his will, he wouldn't have left it open-ended." Scott glanced at Ashley. "That's what we're trying to prove. We have a copy of an unsigned draft of his final will. We need to find out if there's a signed version somewhere." Henry was silent for a moment. If he signed it, it had to be notarized, which means someone out there has a record of it. Ashley's pulse quickened. "Pulse, can you help us find that record?" Henry let out a sigh. "I'll see what I can do, but if Nancy had enough power to make this disappear once, she won't let you bring it back up without a fight." Scott's lips curled into a smirk. "Good thing we're not afraid of a fight." Ashley didn't say anything, but she felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just about uncovering a will anymore. This was about bringing down a woman who had built an empire on lies. By the time they got back to the city, the exhaustion hit Ashley like a truck. Scott pulled up in front of her small apartment. "Killing the engine. You should get some rest," he said. Ashley hesitated. "I don't know if I can." Scott studied her. "Then at least try. We'll regroup in the morning." Ashley nodded, stepping out of the car. As she walked up the stairs to her building, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She turned sharply, scanning the shadows, but there was nothing, just paranoia. Still, as she locked her door behind her, she couldn't help but wonder how much time they really had before Nancy made her next move. The answer came sooner than she expected. The next morning, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "You should have left this alone." The voice sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't Nancy, but it was someone who worked for her. "You have no idea what you're up against, Ashley. Walk away now, or you won't live long enough to regret it." The line went dead. Ashley's fingers tightened around the phone. She wasn't going anywhere. If Nancy wanted a war, she was going to get one. Ashley sat frozen, the phone still clutched in her hand. The voice on the other end had been calm, deliberate. Whoever it was, they weren't making idle threats. Her pulse pounded as she replayed the words in her head. You should have left this alone. Her first instinct was to call Scott, but she stopped herself. He had already done so much to help her. This was her fight, and she needed to be able to handle it. But even as she told herself that, she knew she wasn't safe alone. Taking a shaky breath, she forced herself to move. She grabbed the folder from the nightstand, the one containing her father's draft will, and shoved it into her bag. If someone was watching her, she wasn't going to sit around and wait for them to make a move. As she stepped out of her apartment building, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. The street was mostly empty, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She scanned the parked cars, the alleys, every darkened doorway. Nothing, but the sensation didn't fade. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Scott. I was just about to call you, she said, keeping her voice steady. You need to get to my office now. His tone was clipped, urgent. Ashley's stomach dropped. What happened? I'll tell you when you get here. And don't go straight. Take a different route. Make sure you're not followed. A chill ran down her spine. Scott never sounded this serious unless something was wrong. She didn't argue. Instead of hailing a cab in front of her building, she walked 2 blocks before flagging one down. Even inside the car, she kept glancing at the rearview mirror, expecting to see a black SUV trailing her. But the streets looked normal. It wasn't until she arrived at Scott's office that she realized how badly she had underestimated Nancy. The moment she stepped inside, Scott's assistant gave her a look of concern. Go straight in, she whispered. Ashley pushed open the door to Scott's office and froze. On his desk, a thick envelope sat in the center. Its contents spilled out in neat, organized stacks. Photographs of her, of Scott, of Klein. Every move they had made in the last 24 hours had been documented. Scott stood by the window, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. She's not just watching us, he said, nodding toward the photos. She wants us to know she's watching. Ashley's stomach twisted as she stepped closer, flipping through the images. There was one of her outside Klein's cabin, another of Scott talking to Henry, one of Klein leaving the safe house. Then her fingers stilled over the last photo. It was of her, taken from outside her apartment window. Her blood ran cold. Scott saw the shift in her expression and walked over. When he saw the picture, his eyes darkened. She's escalating. Ashley forced herself to breathe. She sent these to you. Scott nodded. They were waiting for me when I got here this morning. No note, no message, just this. Ashley clenched her fists. She's trying to scare us. Scott's gaze met hers. Is it working? Ashley swallowed hard. No, but it's pissing me off. Scott smirked, though there was no humor in it. Good, because that's exactly what she doesn't want. Ashley paced the room, her mind racing. She wouldn't send these unless she knew we were close to something. She must be panicking. Scott nodded. Which means we need to hit her before she regroups. Ashley stopped pacing. Henry, did he find anything? Scott grabbed his phone and dialed. The moment Henry answered, he put it on speaker. I was just about to call you, Henry said. I found something, a notary record. Ashley's breath hitched. A notary record for what? The real will, Henry said. I traced a filing request made under your father's name just 2 days before his accident. Someone had it notarized, which means there's a record, but... Ashley's stomach dropped. But what? The request was canceled, Henry said. And I'm willing to bet Nancy had something to do with it. Ashley felt a fresh wave of rage. Her father had tried to make things right. He had made sure his will was legally documented. And then Nancy had erased it. Scott's expression was unreadable. Can you get your hands on the original filing? I can try, Henry said. But you need to be careful. If I found this, so can Nancy. She'll do whatever it takes to make sure this stays buried. Ashley's hands trembled, but she curled them into fists. Then we move fast. Scott ended the call and turned to her. We have our next move. We find that notary. We get proof that the real will existed, and we take this public before Nancy can stop us. Ashley exhaled sharply. And if she tries, Scott's smirk was sharp, then she'll find out exactly what it's like to lose everything. Ashley felt something shift inside her. For the first time in years, she wasn't running. She wasn't just surviving, she was fighting back, and she wasn't going to stop until Nancy Morgan was destroyed. Ashley gripped the armrests of her chair, her mind racing. The revelation that her father had notarized his real will before his death changed everything. It wasn't just a draft. It had existed, legally binding. Before Nancy had made sure it disappeared, Scott leaned forward, his elbows resting on his desk. "We need to find that notary. If we can get our hands on that record, it's game over for Nancy." Ashley nodded, forcing herself to stay calm. Henry said the filing request was canceled. That means someone had access to it. If we can figure out who, we'll know exactly where to look. Scott grabbed his phone again, dialing Henry back. When he answered, Scott didn't waste time. Who had the authority to cancel that notary request? Henry sighed. Legally, only a few people. Alexander himself, which we know didn't happen, or someone with power of attorney over his estate at the time. Ashley's stomach twisted. Nancy. Bingo, Henry said. She must have used her influence to have it buried before it could be finalized. But here's the thing. Legal documents like this don't just disappear. There's always a paper trail, somewhere out there. A copy exists. Scott's expression darkened. Then we find it. Henry hesitated. Be careful. If Nancy went this far to erase it, she won't hesitate to make people disappear to keep it hidden. Ashley tightened her grip on the folder in her lap. We're not backing down. Scott ended the call and turned to her. I know a guy at the records office. If Nancy had the request canceled, there might still be a trace of it in the system. A notation, a flagged document. Something. Ashley exhaled. Then let's go. Within an hour, they were stepping into the dimly lit halls of the Municipal Records building. The air smelled of old paper and coffee, and the receptionist barely looked up as they approached. Scott flashed a charming smile. We're here to see Jake. The receptionist sighed, picking up the phone. A few minutes later, a man in his late 50s appeared from the back room, his glasses perched on the tip of his nose. Scott Anderson, he said, shaking his head. Every time you show up, I know I'm about to do something that could get me fired. Scott grinned. That's why you love me. Jake rolled his eyes and gestured for them to follow him. They walked past rows of file cabinets and workstations until they reached a small office. Jake shut the door and leaned against the desk. What do you need? Scott nodded at Ashley. Tell him. Ashley took a steadying breath. My father, Alexander Morgan, had his real will notarized before he died. Nancy Morgan made sure it was never executed. We need proof that it existed. Jake whistled low. You're asking me to dig up something someone powerful went through a lot of trouble to bury. Scott crossed his arms. Think of it as doing the right thing. Jake sighed, rubbing his forehead. All right, give me a few minutes. He turned to his computer, typing rapidly. Ashley watched anxiously as lines of data scrolled across the screen. After what felt like an eternity, Jake frowned. There's a notation here. Ashley leaned closer. What does it say? Jake pointed at the screen. It confirms that a revised will was submitted for notarization under Alexander Morgan's name 2 days before his death. But the request was revoked less than 24 hours later. Scott narrowed his eyes. By who? Jake hesitated. It was flagged under private access, meaning only a high-level legal authority or someone with estate control could have done it. Ashley clenched her jaw. Nancy. Jake nodded. And here's where it gets interesting. Normally, when a filing is canceled, it's just marked as void. But this one, he tapped the screen. It was flagged as restricted access. That means someone wanted to make sure no one could retrieve it. Ashley's hands curled into fists. But it's still here, isn't it? Even if we can't access the full document, we know it was filed. Jake hesitated. Technically, yes. But unless you have high-level clearance, you can't get past this block. Scott smirked. What if we don't go through official channels? Jake groaned. You're going to get me arrested. Ashley stepped forward. Please. This is the only proof I have that my father wanted Nancy out of his will. Jake rubbed his temple, then exhaled. Fine. Give me a few hours. I'll see what I can dig up. Scott nodded. We'll owe you one. As they stepped out of the office, Ashley turned to Scott. This is it. If Jake can get that file, Nancy's finished. Scott's expression was unreadable. If she doesn't get to us first, they didn't have to wait long for an answer. As they exited the building, Ashley's phone buzzed. A text. No name, just a message. You don't know when to quit. Time to learn. Before she could react, tires screeched against the pavement. A black car sped toward them. Scott grabbed her wrist. Move. They barely made it to the sidewalk as the car skidded past them. The windows were tinted, but Ashley knew exactly who had sent it. Nancy had just declared war. Ashley's heart pounded as she pressed herself against the cold concrete of the records building, her breath coming in sharp bursts. The black car that had nearly run them down screeched around the corner and disappeared into the night. But the message was clear. Nancy wasn't just trying to intimidate them anymore. She was trying to eliminate them. Scott was already on his phone, his voice sharp and controlled. Yeah, I need a plate check. Black sedan, tinted windows, almost ran us over outside municipal records. He paused, listening. No, I don't want... Maybe. I want a name. Call me back. Ashley swallowed hard, gripping her bag tighter. This is escalating way too fast. Scott slid his phone into his pocket and turned to her. That wasn't a warning. That was an attempt. Ashley exhaled shakily, her knuckles white. She's getting desperate. Scott's jaw tightened. That's what makes her dangerous. Ashley forced herself to stand straighter, ignoring the shaking in her limbs. We don't stop. Not now. Scott studied her for a moment, then nodded. Let's get out of here. They hurried to Scott's car, still parked a block away. He made sure no one was tailing them before pulling into traffic. Ashley kept glancing over her shoulder, every shadow feeling like a threat. His phone buzzed and he hit speaker. Tell me you have something. Henry's voice came through, low and tense. You two need to sit down for this one. Ashley exchanged a look with Scott. We're listening, Henry sighed. I did some digging. That notary request your father filed. It wasn't just flagged. It was transferred. Ashley frowned. Transferred where? To an independent legal office, off the grid, no direct digital footprint, no online records. Only a few select firms use this kind of system. Mostly people who want to keep things out of reach from, let's say, interested parties. Scott's eyes darkened. So my guess is Nancy didn't just bury the will. She had help. Henry hesitated. Not just any help. The firm it was transferred to. It's linked to Marcus Vance. Ashley felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. Who's Marcus Vance? Scott's grip on the wheel tightened. He's a fixer. Handles legal cleanups for high-profile clients. If something needs to disappear, evidence, records, people, he's the guy they call. Ashley's stomach twisted. And Nancy hired him. Looks that way, Henry said. If your father's real will went through his firm, then it's not just hidden. It's locked away behind a wall of corruption. Ashley pressed a hand to her forehead. This keeps getting worse. Scott's voice was grim. Then we do what we do best. Henry snorted. Which is what, exactly? Go knocking on Vance's door and ask nicely. Scott smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. No, we make him an offer he can't refuse. Ashley frowned. What kind of offer? Scott glanced at her. The kind that gets us what we need without getting us killed. Henry sighed. Whatever you two are planning, just be careful. This guy plays in a different league. And Nancy, if she's desperate enough to use him, she won't hesitate to take more drastic measures. Ashley swallowed hard. We know. Scott ended the call and turned onto a quieter street. The city lights glowing in the distance. We need leverage. If we're going after Vance, we can't just ask for the will. We need something to trade. Ashley thought for a moment. What about Nancy's financial records? The offshore accounts Henry mentioned before. If we expose them, we can tie her to fraud and tax evasion. Scott smirked. Now you're thinking like a player. Ashley didn't smile. I've been forced to learn. Scott reached for his phone again. I have a contact who specializes in high-level financial tracking. If Nancy's been hiding money, he'll find it. Ashley exhaled slowly. We're getting close. Scott nodded. Which means things are about to get even more dangerous. Ashley didn't say anything. She already knew, as the city lights blurred past them. She stared out the window, her mind racing. Nancy had built an empire on stolen power, but the cracks were beginning to show, and Ashley was ready to bring the whole thing crashing down. Ashley stared out the window as the car sped through the dimly lit streets of New York. The city, usually a source of endless movement and distraction, felt eerily quiet. The weight of what they had just learned sat heavy in her chest. Nancy hadn't just stolen her inheritance. She had enlisted one of the most dangerous fixers in the game to erase all traces of her father's real will. And now, Ashley and Scott were walking straight into the lion's den to get it back. Scott drove in silence, his fingers gripping the wheel tighter than usual. His mind was working, strategizing. She could see it in the way his jaw tensed, in the occasional flick of his eyes toward the rearview mirror. Always checking for a tail, Ashley exhaled. So how exactly do we make a man like Marcus Vance an offer he can't refuse? Scott's lips curled into a smirk, but there was no humor in it. Men like Vance don't work on loyalty, they work on power. If we can make it more beneficial for him to hand over the will than to keep protecting Nancy, we win. Ashley frowned. And how do we do that? Scott pulled the car onto a quieter street, parking near a high-rise apartment building with tinted windows. By giving him something he values more than a paycheck from Nancy. He killed the engine and turned to face her fully. We need leverage. Something so damning that it forces his hand. Ashley thought for a moment, then nodded. Nancy's offshore accounts. If we expose them, it won't just be about my inheritance anymore. She'll be looking at federal charges. Fraud, tax evasion, possibly even conspiracy. Scott's smirk returned, this time with a spark of approval. Exactly. We make her too toxic to protect. Ashley's stomach twisted at the thought. This wasn't just about proving her father's will was real anymore. It was about dismantling everything Nancy had built on lies. And it wasn't just her life at stake. Scott's phone buzzed, pulling them both from their thoughts. He glanced at the screen before answering. Tell me you have something. Henry's voice came through, low and urgent. You're not going to like this. Ashley leaned closer, dread coiling in her gut. What is it? Henry hesitated. I traced some of Nancy's financial movements just like you asked. Offshore accounts, shell companies. She's been funneling money for years. But here's the thing. She's not just hiding money. Scott's expression darkened. Then what the hell is she doing? Henry sighed. She's paying people off. Judges, attorneys, politicians. Nancy isn't just protecting herself. She's built a network of powerful people who owe her favors. That's why she's been untouchable for so long. Ashley's blood ran cold. That means even if we get the will, even if we expose her, she still has people in her pocket who can make it all go away. Scott let out a low curse, rubbing his temple. So we don't just need proof. We need undeniable, career-destroying, headline-making evidence. Henry exhaled. I might have something, but you're not going to like where it is. Ashley braced herself. Where? There was a pause before Henry answered. Marcus Vance's office. Ashley's pulse jumped. You're saying he has something on Nancy? More than something, Henry said. He keeps records on everyone he works with. Insurance, in case one of his clients ever tries to turn on him. If he has files on Nancy, they'll have everything. Who she paid, how much, when, and for what. Scott's eyes gleamed. If we get that, we don't just have leverage. We have a loaded gun. Ashley exhaled slowly, her mind racing. But Vance is no fool. He won't just hand it over. No, Henry agreed. Which is why you need to make him think he doesn't have a choice. Scott's smirk returned. Now you're speaking my language. Ashley shot him a wary glance. Do I even want to know what you're thinking? Scott leaned back in his seat, his fingers tapping against the leather steering wheel. Vance operates on control. He thinks he's untouchable. We take that away, even for a second, and he'll fold. Ashley arched a brow. And how exactly do we do that? Scott's smirk widened. We trap him. Ashley crossed her arms. I assume you have a plan? Scott nodded. We leak just enough information to make him think someone else already has dirt on Nancy. If he thinks the walls are closing in, he'll want to cut ties with her to save himself. Ashley chewed her lip, considering it. And once he's desperate, we strike. Scott's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text. He read it quickly and grinned. Perfect timing. My guy just cracked into Nancy's shell companies. We have everything we need to make Vance sweat. Ashley's heart pounded. Then let's set the trap. They spent the next few hours laying the groundwork. Scott's contacts planted subtle hints in places Vance was sure to notice. An anonymous tip sent to a journalist. A quiet leak into legal circles that suggested Nancy's finances were under scrutiny. They needed him to feel the pressure, to think that his best move was to cut ties with Nancy before he went down with her. By the time they were ready, Ashley felt the exhaustion settle deep in her bones. She hadn't slept in what felt like days. But there was no time to rest. Not yet. Scott stretched his arms, rolling his shoulders. Now we wait. Ashley glanced at him. And if this doesn't work, Scott's smirk was sharp. Then we make sure it does. Ashley exhaled, gripping the edge of the desk. They were close. So close if this worked, if Vance caved. Then she would finally have the proof she needed to destroy Nancy once and for all. But as she stared out into the city, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle hadn't even begun yet. Nancy had been in control for too long, and people like her never went down without a fight. Ashley sat in the dimly lit corner of Scott's office, staring at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The lights of New York stretched endlessly before her, a dazzling illusion of order in a world that was anything but. She had spent years surviving in the shadows, waiting for a moment like this, one where she could finally fight back. But now that they were on the verge of breaking Nancy's empire, the weight of it all pressed down on her. Scott, seated at his desk, was typing furiously on his laptop, finalizing the last phase of their plan. His contacts had already started planting the seeds of doubt in Marcus Vance's world, and soon, the fixer would be looking over his shoulder, wondering just how deep the cracks in Nancy's armor ran. Ashley let out a slow breath. How do we know it's working? Scott didn't look up. Because men like Vance don't wait until the fire reaches their doorstep to run. They start moving the moment they smell smoke. His phone buzzed, and he grabbed it without hesitation, putting the call on speaker. Henry's voice came through, sharp and urgent. We've got movement. Vance's office has been in damage control mode for the last 2 hours. He's been making calls, sending out feelers. Whatever you did, he's nervous. Ashley sat up straighter. Does he know it's us? No, Henry replied. And that's exactly why he's panicking. He doesn't know where the leak is coming from, which means he can't contain it. Scott smirked, clearly pleased. That's exactly what we wanted. Keep watching. Let us know if he does anything drastic. Will do, Henry said before hanging up. Ashley turned to Scott. So what now? We just wait until he comes to us. Scott leaned back in his chair, studying her. Not exactly. We're going to force his hand. Ashley frowned. How? Scott grabbed his phone again and made another call. This time, his tone was different. Cool, confident, controlled. Vance, we need to talk. Ashley's heart pounded as she watched him. There was a long pause before a deep voice responded on the other end. I was wondering when you'd call, Anderson. Scott's smirk didn't falter. I figured you might be. Vance let out a dry chuckle. You've been busy. Stirring up rumors, making me look over my shoulder. Bold move. Scott didn't react to the bait. Just setting the stage, Vance hummed, considering. And what exactly is it you want? Ashley leaned closer, listening intently. Scott's voice was smooth, deliberate. Nancy Morgan. Everything you have on her. A sharp silence followed. Then Vance laughed, low and amused. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But you must know that information doesn't come cheap. Scott's smirk widened. I think you'll find our offer very reasonable. Vance's tone shifted, laced with curiosity. I'm listening. Scott leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. We know you keep records on your clients. We also know that if Nancy goes down, she won't go quietly. She'll take down everyone who's ever protected her, including you. Vance didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was sharper. You think you can threaten me? Scott chuckled. Not at all. We're offering you an exit. Give us the files on Nancy, and we make sure your name never comes up when this all blows up. Ashley held her breath, waiting. Vance let out a slow breath. That's an interesting offer, Scott pressed. But you're running out of time. Nancy's world is crumbling, and if you wait too long, you won't have the luxury of choosing sides. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension. Then Vance spoke. Meet me at the Grand Haven Hotel, penthouse suite, 2 hours. The line went dead. Scott set the phone down and exhaled. And that, my dear Ashley, is how you make a power play. Ashley's pulse was racing. Do you think he'll actually give us what we need? Scott stood, grabbing his coat. He'll give us something. The question is, will it be enough? Ashley followed him toward the door, her stomach twisting with a mix of anticipation and unease. This was it, the moment they had been working toward. But something in the back of her mind whispered that Nancy wasn't done yet. As they stepped out into the night, Ashley couldn't shake the feeling that the real game had just begun. Ashley sat quietly in the passenger seat of Scott's car as they navigated the streets toward the Grand Haven Hotel. Her fingers tapped restlessly against her knee, a habit she had developed over the years whenever she was lost in thought. Tonight, her mind was racing at full speed. Scott, ever composed, focused on the road, his expression unreadable. He had been in situations like this before. High-stakes deals, power plays, dangerous negotiations. But for Ashley, this was uncharted territory. She had spent so long fighting alone, surviving in the shadows, that it was still surreal to be sitting beside someone who not only believed in her cause, but was willing to go to war for it. "I need you to let me handle this," Scott said suddenly, breaking the silence. Ashley turned to him, brow furrowed. "I'm not just going to sit there and watch," Scott smirked, though there was a warning behind it. "Vance isn't someone you negotiate with like a normal businessman. He operates on leverage, control, and calculated risks. If we push too hard, he could decide we're more trouble than we're worth." Ashley exhaled, forcing herself to stay calm. "I understand, but if he tries to back out or twist the deal, I'm not just going to sit there quietly." Scott glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. "Fair enough. Just don't make yourself a target." She swallowed hard, gripping her bag where the evidence they had collected so far was safely tucked away. This was their best shot at getting the proof they needed to bring Nancy down. They couldn't afford to fail. When they pulled up in front of the Grand Haven Hotel, Ashley immediately felt the weight of the place. It wasn't just luxurious. It exuded power, the kind of power that came from men like Marcus Vance. Scott handed his keys to the valet, and they walked through the grand entrance as if they belonged there. Ashley straightened her shoulders, pushing down the nervous energy buzzing through her. She had spent years being invisible, hiding in the background. But tonight, she needed to be someone else. Someone who wasn't afraid. They rode the private elevator in silence. The penthouse suite was at the very top, and with each floor they ascended, Ashley felt the tension coiling tighter in her chest. When the doors finally slid open, they were met by two men in dark suits, standing like statues outside the suite's entrance. One of them gave Scott a once-over before nodding and pushing the door open. Inside, the air smelled of expensive cigars and leather. The room was vast, modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city. But Ashley barely noticed. Her eyes locked on the man sitting in an oversized chair near the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Marcus Vance. He was older than she expected, maybe in his late 50s, but there was nothing soft about him. His suit was impeccable, his posture relaxed, but his eyes, cold and calculating, gave away the predator beneath the polished exterior. "Scott Anderson," Vance said, his voice smooth but laced with quiet amusement. "Always a pleasure." Scott offered a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Let's skip the pleasantries." Vance took a slow sip of his drink before turning his gaze to Ashley. He studied her, as if sizing her up before setting his glass down. "And you must be Ashley Morgan," he said, his voice full of something she couldn't quite place. Curiosity, maybe, or mild amusement. "I have to say, you've caused quite a bit of trouble for Nancy." Ashley met his gaze without flinching. "She caused trouble for herself." Vance chuckled, shaking his head. "Bold. I respect that." He gestured toward the couch across from him. "Sit." Scott and Ashley took their seats, and for a moment, the only sound in the room was the distant hum of the city outside. Vance leaned back, steepling his fingers. "So, let's get to the point. You want something from me?" Scott nodded. "The files on Nancy Morgan. Everything you have." Vance smirked. "And why would I do that?" Scott pulled out his phone and slid it across the table. "Because if you don't, the next person who calls you won't be me. It'll be the FBI. Vance arched a brow, but picked up the phone, glancing at the screen. Whatever he saw made his smirk fade slightly. Ashley spoke before she could second-guess herself. "We have evidence of Nancy's offshore accounts, fraudulent transactions and bribes. Enough to bring down more than just her. Enough to put anyone who helped her in legal jeopardy." Vance studied her, silent for a moment. Then he chuckled, shaking his head. You know, I underestimated you. Ashley's fingers curled into fists. A lot of people did, Vance exhaled, leaning forward. Let's say I give you what you want. What happens next? Scott didn't hesitate. Nancy burns, and you walk away clean. Vance was quiet, his fingers drumming against the table. And if I say no? Scott's smirk returned. Then we make sure you burn with her. Ashley held her breath as the silence stretched. Vance's expression remained unreadable, but she could see the wheels turning in his head. Finally, he exhaled through his nose and nodded. All right. Ashley's pulse jumped. Vance stood, walking over to a safe hidden behind a piece of modern art. He pressed his palm against a biometric scanner, and the heavy door clicked open. Inside were stacks of files, but Vance pulled out one in particular, a thick manila envelope. He carried it back to the table and dropped it in front of Scott. That's everything I have on Nancy, he said. Every deal, every bribe, every backroom agreement she's ever made. Ashley reached for it. Flipping through the pages, it was all there. Names, dates, transactions, the kind of evidence that couldn't be explained away. Vance leaned down slightly, meeting her eyes. Be careful, Miss Morgan. You may think you've won, but Nancy isn't the type to lose quietly. Ashley met his gaze head-on. Neither am I, Vance smirked, then straightened, turning his attention back to Scott. Pleasure doing business, Anderson. Scott picked up the envelope and stood. Likewise. Without another word, they turned and left. As they stepped into the elevator, Ashley finally let herself breathe. She clutched the folder to her chest. Her heart hammering, Scott glanced at her. We did it. Ashley nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Vance was right. Nancy wasn't done, and the real fight was just beginning. The elevator ride down from the penthouse was suffocatingly silent. Ashley clutched the thick envelope to her chest, her pulse still racing from what had just happened. She should have felt victorious. They had what they needed, the proof that could bring Nancy down once and for all. But something about the way Vance had handed it over so easily gnawed at her. Scott stood beside her, his posture relaxed, but Ashley knew better. He was just as tense as she was, his mind already running a dozen scenarios ahead. When the elevator doors slid open into the lobby, he placed a hand on her lower back, guiding her swiftly toward the exit. The Grand Haven Hotel's lobby was a picture of quiet opulence, high ceilings, glittering chandeliers, and hushed conversations among the city's elite, but Ashley barely noticed. Her senses were on high alert. Every person in the room felt like a threat. Every glance in their direction sent a prickle down her spine. They stepped outside into the cool night air, and Scott immediately scanned the street. His car was parked a block away, tucked between two SUVs. He reached for his phone, but before he could dial, Ashley grabbed his arm. We need to move, she whispered. Scott's eyes flicked to hers, reading something in her expression. Without another word, they started walking, not toward his car, but in the opposite direction. Ashley's heart pounded. I don't trust this. Vance handed over that file too easily. Scott's jaw clenched. I know. I don't like it either. They turned the corner onto a quieter street, where the glow of neon signs reflected on the wet pavement. Ashley forced herself to breathe evenly, to keep her steps casual, but she could feel it. They were being followed. Scott must have sensed it too, because he suddenly grabbed her wrist and pulled her into a narrow alleyway between two buildings. They pressed themselves against the shadows, listening. A few seconds later, footsteps echoed against the pavement. Slow, deliberate. Ashley's fingers tightened around the envelope. Scott leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. 3 men, dark suits. They're not tourists. Ashley didn't dare move. The footsteps stopped just outside the alley. Then, the sharp crack of a gunshot shattered the quiet night. Scott moved instantly, shoving Ashley behind a stack of crates, just as a bullet embedded itself in the brick wall where she had been standing. Run, he ordered, already drawing a gun from inside his jacket. Ashley hesitated for half a second, just long enough for Scott to fire back. One of the men grunted and staggered back, but the other 2 didn't flinch. Ashley's survival instincts kicked in. She bolted down the alley, clutching the envelope to her chest. Scott was right behind her, covering their escape. They burst out onto another street, where a yellow cab had just pulled up to the curb. Scott yanked the door open. Get in! Ashley dove inside, and Scott followed, slamming the door shut. "Drive now!" The driver hesitated for only a second before peeling away from the curb. Ashley barely had time to catch her breath before she twisted around, looking out the rear window. The men weren't following. Scott ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. That was Nancy. Ashley nodded, her hands still trembling. She knew. Scott's eyes flicked to the envelope in her lap. We have to assume Vance tipped her off. Ashley's stomach twisted. It made sense. Vance had handed over the file too quickly, too cleanly. He had likely made a deal. Give them what they wanted, then make sure they didn't live long enough to use it. Scott leaned forward. "Driver, take us to the West End." Ashley frowned. "Your office?" Scott shook his head. "Too obvious. We need to go somewhere she won't expect." Ashley gripped the envelope tighter. "Henry? He has a secure place, right?" Scott nodded. "Yeah, we'll go there first." The drive was tense, neither of them speaking. Ashley's mind was racing. If Nancy had already sent people after them, it meant she was willing to go to extremes. And if she was that desperate, she wouldn't stop until they were dead. When they arrived at Henry's safe house, a nondescript townhouse on a quiet street, Scott wasted no time pounding on the door. Henry yanked it open, eyes widening. What the hell happened? Scott pushed Ashley inside before following. "Nancy sent people, we barely got away." Henry cursed, locking the door behind them. "I told you this was dangerous." Ashley ignored him and placed the envelope on the table. "We have it, the proof." Henry's eyes flickered with something between relief and worry. He grabbed the envelope, flipping through the files. His expression darkened. "This is enough to bury her," he said, voice low. "If we get this into the right hands, she's done." Scott nodded. "Then we move fast." Henry pulled out his laptop and started scanning the documents. "I'll encrypt this and send it to a few trusted sources. We need redundancies. If something happens to us, this still needs to get out." Ashley exhaled, forcing herself to focus. "What's our next move?" Scott glanced at her. "We need to go public. News outlets, social media. Anywhere we can make sure she can't control the narrative." Henry grunted. "That won't be easy. She has powerful people protecting her." Scott smirked. "Then we make sure they can't protect her anymore." Ashley met his gaze. "We expose everything." Scott nodded. "Everything," Henry typed furiously, sending files to multiple encrypted locations. "Once I hit send, there's no going back." Ashley took a deep breath. "Do it." Henry hit the button. A moment of silence. Then his phone buzzed. He picked it up, his expression shifting from tense to grim. Scott frowned. "What?" Henry exhaled. "It's not just Nancy. She's making a move on us, too." Ashley's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" Henry's eyes locked onto hers. "There's a hit out on both of you." The room fell into a suffocating silence. The only sound was the hum of Henry's laptop and the distant murmur of traffic outside. Ashley felt the weight of his words settle over her like a thick fog. A hit. Nancy wasn't just trying to stop them. She wanted them dead. Scott was the first to move. He ran a hand down his face, exhaling sharply, before his gaze snapped back to Henry. "How reliable is this intel?" Henry didn't hesitate. "Very. My source intercepted chatter from one of Nancy's security teams. She's not just sending people after you. She's put a bounty on both of your heads." Ashley's breath hitched. "A bounty?" Henry's expression was grim. "A lot of money, no questions asked, the kind of deal that attracts the worst kind of people." Scott cursed under his breath, his fists clenching. "She's desperate. She knows we have the evidence, and she can't stop it from going public. This is her last move." Ashley's pulse pounded in her ears. "Then we need to move before they do." Henry nodded, already typing furiously. "I just sent the files to 3 trusted journalists and 2 separate legal firms. The moment they verify the documents, they'll start running the story." He looked up at them. "But that's not going to save you tonight. You need to disappear. Now." Scott was already one step ahead. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and waited. "It's me. I need an exit plan, now." A pause, then his jaw tightened. "Fine, 30 minutes. Ashley's mind was spinning. "Where are we going?" Scott hung up and turned to her. "There's a safe house outside the city, isolated, secure. We stay there until the story explodes. Once it does, Nancy won't have anywhere left to hide." Henry pushed away from his desk, rubbing his temple. You don't have 30 minutes. Scott's expression darkened. What do you mean? Henry turned his screen to face them. It displayed security footage from outside his townhouse. A live feed. 3 black SUVs had just pulled up across the street. Ashley's blood ran cold. Scott didn't waste a second. We're leaving now. Henry grabbed a gun from a drawer and shoved it toward Scott. You might need this. Scott took it without hesitation and turned to Ashley. Stay close. Ashley barely had time to grab the envelope before Scott pulled her toward the back of the house. Henry led them through a hidden door in the kitchen, which opened into a dark, narrow alley. Footsteps crunched on gravel behind them. Ashley's pulse spiked. They were already here. Scott didn't hesitate. He grabbed her hand and ran. The alley was tight, the air thick with the stench of garbage and damp concrete. The only light came from a flickering street lamp at the far end. They had barely made it halfway when a voice echoed from behind them. They're in the alley. A gunshot ripped through the air. Ashley ducked instinctively, her heart hammering in her chest. Scott pulled her sharply to the right, down another narrow passage between 2 buildings. Cars 2 blocks away, he muttered, his grip firm on her wrist. We make it there. We're gone. Ashley didn't look back. She focused on her feet, on keeping up with Scott, on not dying. More footsteps thundered behind them. More voices shouting orders. Scott pivoted sharply, yanking her behind a dumpster just as another shot rang out, the bullet ricocheting off the brick wall inches from them. Ashley squeezed her eyes shut, trying to keep herself from panicking. Scott turned to her, his voice low and firm. Listen to me. When I say go, you run. Don't stop. Don't look back. Get to the car. Got it. Ashley's throat was dry. She nodded. Scott peeked around the dumpster, then fired 2 shots. A shout of pain followed. Go! Ashley sprinted. The world became a blur, the pavement beneath her feet, the sound of gunfire behind her, the burning in her lungs. None of it mattered. All that mattered was getting to the car. She saw it ahead. A black sedan, parked at the curb with its engine running. A man sat in the driver's seat, face unreadable. She didn't stop. She yanked the door open and threw herself inside. Scott slid in right after her. Drive! The car lurched forward, tires screeching against the pavement. Ashley turned in her seat, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The men who had been chasing them spilled onto the street, shouting, waving their guns. But they were too late. They were gone. Scott exhaled. Running a hand through his hair, he turned to Ashley, his expression unreadable. You okay? Ashley let out a shaky laugh. I just outran hitmen. I have no idea. Scott smirked. That's fair. The driver spoke for the first time. Where to? Scott didn't hesitate. Safe house now. The car sped toward the outskirts of the city, the glowing skyline fading behind them. Ashley stared out the window, her heart still pounding. Nancy had tried to kill them. She had failed. And now, Ashley was going to finish this. The city lights faded behind them as the black sedan sped down the highway, cutting through the darkness like a blade. Ashley pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the skyline disappear. Her body was still buzzing with adrenaline, but exhaustion threatened to drag her under. Scott sat beside her, his eyes scanning the rearview mirror every few seconds. The driver, a silent, stoic man Scott had called during their escape, remained focused on the road. Ashley didn't know his name, and at this point she didn't care. All that mattered was that he was getting them away. Nancy had made her move, and she had lost. Ashley exhaled, gripping the thick envelope in her lap. This was it. The key to everything. The proof that would bring Nancy down. The evidence that her father's will had been rewritten, that Nancy had orchestrated a massive financial fraud, that she had bribed judges, officials, even law enforcement, to maintain her grip on power. She had spent years struggling, fighting, just to survive. And now, she was winning. Scott finally broke the silence. We're clear for now. Ashley tore her gaze from the window, turning to face him. For now. Scott studied her, his expression unreadable. You should rest. It's been a long night. Ashley let out a hollow laugh. I don't think I remember how to rest. Scott smirked, but there was something softer behind it. That makes 2 of us. The driver spoke for the first time, his voice even and calm. We'll be at the safe house in 15 minutes. Ashley nodded, shifting in her seat. Is it actually safe. Scott nodded. It's one of Henry's places. No digital footprint. No connection to me or you. No one will find us there. Ashley wanted to believe that. She needed to believe that. 15 minutes later, they pulled onto a secluded road, the headlights illuminating an old but sturdy-looking cabin nestled deep in the woods. The trees stretched high around them, thick enough to keep unwanted eyes out. The driver killed the engine. Scott was out first, scanning the area before nodding for Ashley to follow. She clutched the envelope and stepped out into the crisp night air. The silence was almost unnerving after the chaos of the city. Scott unlocked the door and ushered her inside. The cabin was small but functional. Minimal furniture, bare walls, but well stocked with supplies. Scott locked the door behind them, then checked the windows. Once he was satisfied, he turned to Ashley. "We're good." Ashley let out a slow breath, finally allowing herself to sit down. She placed the envelope on the wooden table in front of her and ran a hand through her hair. "It's almost over." Scott sat across from her. "Almost." Ashley's fingers traced the edge of the envelope. "We need to get this out to the public before Nancy can spin the story." Scott nodded. "Henry is handling the legal side. The media outlets we sent this to should have everything by morning." He leaned back, his gaze steady. "By this time tomorrow, Nancy Morgan's empire will be collapsing." Ashley should have felt relief. She should have felt victory. But instead, she felt uneasy. Something wasn't right. Scott noticed her tension. "What is it?" Ashley exhaled, shaking her head. "It's too easy. Nancy isn't the kind of person who just lets go." Scott studied her. "You're right, she isn't." Ashley tapped the envelope. "She must have a backup plan, something to keep her from going down with the ship." Scott rubbed his jaw. "Then we need to figure out what it is." Before Ashley could respond, her phone buzzed, a blocked number. Her stomach twisted. She met Scott's gaze before answering. She barely had time to say hello before a familiar voice filled her ears. "You think this is over, Nancy?" Ashley's grip on the phone tightened. "You sound nervous." Nancy let out a cold laugh. "You have no idea what you've done." Ashley forced her voice to stay steady. "I know exactly what I've done. And by this time tomorrow, so will everyone else." Nancy's voice remained eerily calm. "You don't understand power, Ashley. It doesn't just disappear because you want it to." Scott leaned in closer, listening. Ashley smirked. "Neither does justice." Nancy exhaled. "Let me tell you how this ends. You think you've won. You think I'm finished, but people like me, we don't lose. We adapt." Ashley's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" Nancy chuckled. "You'll see soon enough." The line went dead. Ashley pulled the phone away from her ear, her pulse racing. Scott's expression hardened. "She's planning something." Ashley's mind raced. "We need to move faster. We need to make sure the entire world sees what she's done before she can cover her tracks." Scott nodded. "Then we wake Henry up." Ashley grabbed her bag, tucking the envelope inside. Scott was already dialing Henry's number as they stepped outside to get a signal. The night was too quiet. Ashley's instincts screamed at her. Something wasn't. An explosion ripped through the cabin. The force threw her forward, slamming her against the ground. The world became a blur of fire, debris, and ringing in her ears. She gasped for air, struggling to push herself up. The cabin was gone, a massive fireball lighting up the night sky. Scott coughed, staggering to his feet beside her. "Are you hurt?" Ashley shook her head, her ears still ringing. The envelope. Scott pulled it from his jacket, miraculously intact. "Got it." Ashley's stomach twisted. Nancy had found them. Scott grabbed her arm. "We have to go now." Ashley barely had time to process before headlights appeared in the distance. They were coming. Scott yanked her toward the woods. They ran, and Ashley knew. Nancy wasn't done yet. Ashley's lungs burned as she sprinted through the dense forest, her legs moving on pure adrenaline. The explosion still echoed in her ears, the ground trembling beneath her feet, even though the blast had already faded. Smoke and fire painted the night behind them, illuminating the trees in an eerie, flickering glow. Scott ran beside her, his grip tight around her wrist, pulling her forward. The envelope was still clutched in his other hand. Their only proof, their last shot at taking Nancy down. the evidence she had tried to erase with fire and death. Headlights cut through the trees behind them, bouncing over the uneven terrain, the sound of tires crunching over fallen leaves, the distant shouts of men, and the unmistakable click of gun safeties being released sent a cold wave of fear through Ashley's body. "They're gaining on us," she panted, her breath sharp and ragged. Scott cursed under his breath. "We need to lose them." Ashley's mind raced, scanning the terrain. The forest was thick, but the pursuers were organized. These weren't just hired thugs. Nancy had sent professionals. Scott pulled her toward a steep decline. "Downhill! Now!" Ashley barely had time to register what he meant before they leapt. The ground vanished beneath her, and suddenly she was tumbling, rolling violently through the undergrowth, branches scraping her skin, rocks bruising her ribs. She barely managed to keep her arms tucked in, her body twisting to absorb the impact. She hit the bottom hard, the breath knocked out of her lungs. Scott landed beside her, coughing as he pulled himself up. A shout rang from the top of the hill. Flashlights swept over the terrain. Scott grabbed Ashley's arm, pulling her toward a narrow creek running through the forest. "We follow the water. It'll hide our trail." Ashley nodded, forcing herself to keep moving. The icy water bit at her ankles as they waded deeper, the darkness swallowing them. The sound of their pursuers above grew distant, but Ashley knew they weren't safe. Not yet. They kept moving for what felt like an eternity. The creek twisted and turned, the cold seeping into Ashley's bones. She shivered but pushed forward, her mind focused on one thing: getting out of this alive. Finally, Scott slowed, pressing a finger to his lips. He gestured ahead, where the forest began to thin. The glow of distant streetlights flickered through the trees. A road. Ashley's heart leapt. "We can flag someone down. Get out of here." Scott's expression darkened. Or Nancy already has people waiting. Ashley swallowed hard. He was right. They couldn't assume safety. Not yet. Scott pulled out his phone. No signal. Ashley exhaled sharply. "So what do we do?" Scott scanned the area. His eyes landed on an abandoned hunting cabin at the edge of the trees. It was small, barely more than a shack, but it had 4 walls and a roof. He nodded toward it. "We regroup, call for backup. Then we finish this." Ashley didn't argue. They made their way to the cabin, moving carefully, scanning for movement. It was silent. No lights, no signs of life. Scott tried the door. Locked. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a switchblade, and had it open in seconds. Inside, the air was thick with dust. The furniture was old, untouched. A few hunting supplies were scattered around. A rusted lantern, a weathered rifle mounted on the wall. Scott pulled the curtains shut and turned to Ashley. "We need to make contact." Ashley's hands were still trembling as she pulled out her phone. No signal. Scott tried his burner. Nothing. Ashley let out a slow breath. "Henry must know by now. If he doesn't hear from us, he'll know something's wrong." Scott exhaled, pacing. "Nancy's pulling out all the stops. That means she's desperate. She's running out of options." Ashley clutched the envelope. "Then we have to push her over the edge." Scott nodded, his mind already working. "We need to bait her out, force her to make a mistake." Ashley hesitated. "You mean, go after her directly?" Scott met her gaze. "We don't have a choice anymore." Ashley felt her pulse hammering, but she knew he was right. If they stayed on defense, they'd never win. Nancy had money, connections, and killers on her payroll, but they had the truth, and now they had nothing left to lose. Scott grabbed a radio from the hunting supplies and started fiddling with the frequency. Old tech, might still work. Ashley listened as static filled the cabin. Then, a voice broke through. "Scott." Ashley's breath caught. "Henry." Scott grabbed the radio. "Henry, we're alive, but barely. The cabin is gone. They found us." Henry's voice was tight. "Jesus, are you hurt?" Scott glanced at Ashley, then shook his head. "We're fine, but we need an exit." Henry hesitated. "Not yet. You don't want to run right now." Scott frowned. "Why the hell not?" Henry's voice was low. "Because Nancy is making her final move." Ashley stiffened. "What do you mean?" Henry exhaled. "She's on live TV right now. Spinning the entire thing." Scott cursed. "Of course she is," Henry continued. She's calling it an attack on her character, saying she's the victim of a smear campaign orchestrated by people who want to see her empire collapse. She's playing the sympathy card, and some media outlets are eating it up. Ashley's stomach turned. That snake! Scott ran a hand through his hair. That means we need to go public now. Henry hesitated. Already ahead of you. The files are being released as we speak. It's only a matter of time before the narrative shifts. Ashley exhaled, gripping the radio. Then we need to make sure it hits hard. Henry's voice lowered. There's more. Ashley's blood ran cold. What? Henry took a breath. Nancy isn't just spinning the story. She's blaming you. Ashley froze. Scott's expression darkened. What? She's saying you're behind it all, Ashley. That you're a bitter, unstable woman trying to destroy her out of spite. She's painting herself as the mother figure who tried to help you. Ashley's hands clenched into fists. Scott's voice was deadly calm. That's it. We end this tonight. Ashley's heart pounded. How? Scott met her gaze. We go to her, face to face, and we burn her to the ground. Ashley swallowed hard. The final showdown was coming, and Nancy wasn't walking away from this one. The city was alive with tension. The streets of Manhattan pulsed with the glow of traffic lights and the flash of billboards displaying Nancy Morgan's face. Her carefully curated image splashed across every screen, on every news channel. Her calm, composed voice spun a story that was nothing short of a masterpiece in manipulation. She sat in front of the cameras, dressed in an elegant navy suit, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her expression the perfect balance of poise and concern. This has been an incredibly difficult time for me, she said, her voice laced with just enough emotion to seem genuine. I have given everything to this company, to my family, and now I find myself at the center of a horrific smear campaign. Lies, false accusations, people who I once considered family have turned against me. A sympathetic reporter leaned forward. You're saying these allegations are completely false? Nancy sighed delicately, placing a hand on her chest. Absolutely. I would never betray the trust of my investors, my employees, or my loved ones. Ashley wanted to punch the screen. She sat in the passenger seat of Scott's car, gripping the envelope in her lap as they sped toward their final destination. Scott sat behind the wheel, his jaw clenched, his knuckles white around the steering wheel. She's good, he muttered, his voice dark with frustration. She's spinning this faster than we expected. Ashley exhaled sharply. Then we take control of the narrative. Scott's eyes flicked to her, searching her expression. You ready for this? Ashley's fingers tightened around the evidence, the stack of documents that would bury Nancy Morgan forever. I was born ready, Scott smirked. That's what I like to hear. They pulled into the underground parking garage of Morgan Industries, Nancy's corporate empire. The towering glass skyscraper loomed above them, a monument to her power. But Ashley wasn't here to admire the architecture. She was here to bring it all down. Scott parked near a private elevator and turned to her. Last chance to back out. Ashley met his gaze. Not a chance. They stepped out of the car, the air thick with tension. Scott had called ahead. They weren't sneaking in. They were walking straight into the lion's den the moment they entered the lobby. Security was waiting. 4 men in dark suits, their hands resting casually on their concealed weapons. But Ashley didn't flinch. She lifted her chin. I have an appointment with Nancy. The guards exchanged a glance before one of them pressed a finger to his earpiece. A moment later, he nodded. She's expecting you, Scott exhaled. That's never a good sign. The guards escorted them to the top floor, where Nancy's private office was located. The elevator ride was silent, the tension thick enough to suffocate. Ashley's pulse pounded, but her resolve was stronger than ever. The doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing Nancy's empire. The office was a masterpiece of power and wealth, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a mahogany desk large enough to be mistaken for a conference table, and sleek modern decor that screamed status. Nancy stood by the window, a glass of wine in her hand, her reflection cast against the glittering skyline. She didn't turn around. I have to admit, I admire your persistence, she said, her voice smooth as silk. Most people would have given up by now. Ashley stepped forward, holding up the folder of evidence. You should have killed me when you had the chance. Nancy finally turned, a cold smirk curving her lips. Don't mistake my mercy for weakness, dear. Scott let out a dry laugh. Mercy, you tried to have us killed. Nancy sighed, as if the whole situation was an inconvenience. If I wanted you dead, you would be. She took a sip of her wine. But now you've become a problem, one that needs to be handled differently. Ashley's grip tightened on the folder. This is over, Nancy. She slammed the documents onto Nancy's desk. Every bribe, every offshore account, every forged signature. You've built an empire on lies, and now the whole world is going to know it. Nancy set down her glass, her eyes flicking over the papers. Then she let out a soft chuckle. Oh, Ashley. She shook her head. You're still so naive. Ashley stiffened. What are you talking about? Nancy leaned against her desk, crossing her arms. Do you really think evidence is enough to take me down? Do you have any idea how many people owe me favors? How many politicians, judges, and CEOs are in my pocket? Scott's expression darkened. They won't protect you when this goes public. Nancy smirked. Won't they? Ashley's heart pounded. Nancy turned toward the massive TV screen mounted on her office wall and picked up a remote with the press of a button. The screen flickered to life. A news anchor appeared, shuffling papers before looking directly into the camera. We have breaking news tonight. Shocking allegations have surfaced against Ashley Morgan, the estranged stepdaughter of Nancy Morgan. New reports claim that Ashley has been involved in a fraudulent scheme, fabricating documents in an attempt to extort money from her stepmother's company. Ashley's stomach dropped. The screen flashed with doctored images, fake documents, fabricated bank statements, a twisted version of reality that painted Ashley as the villain. Nancy let out a low laugh. You see, dear, I always plan ahead. Ashley's hands clenched into fists. Scott stepped forward, his voice sharp. This won't save you. You're desperate, and it shows. Nancy's smirk widened. You think so? She leaned closer. Or have I already won? Ashley's rage boiled over. You haven't won, Nancy. Not yet. She grabbed her phone, pulled up the live news feed, and tapped into the encrypted link Henry had sent her earlier. The real evidence. And then, she hit send. Within seconds, Nancy's face changed. Her phone buzzed. So did Scott's. The news was breaking. The real news, the documents, the financial records, the bribes, all of it was going public in real time. Nancy's phone rang. She snatched it up. What? A long pause. Nancy's face drained of color. Ashley crossed her arms. Now do you see? Nancy gritted her teeth, her knuckles white around the phone. This isn't over, she hissed. Ashley smiled. Oh, but it is. Security burst into the room. But they weren't here for Ashley. They were here for Nancy. A voice came over the intercom. Ms. Morgan, the authorities are here to see you. Nancy's mask cracked. For the first time, she looked afraid. Scott smirked. Game over. Nancy's hands trembled. She had lost. Ashley took a deep breath as she watched her stepmother's empire crumble around her. She had fought. She had survived. And finally, she had won.